I'm Jana.
And I'm Carol.
And this is the Real Talk Recreation Therapy Podcast.
On this podcast, we talk about real experiences and real research that back up the use of recreation therapy as a method of treatment for a variety of populations.
We try to keep it real as we address concerns and successes that we and other recreation therapists have had as we all navigate this awesome career field.
We don't have it all figured out, but one thing we know for sure is everything gets a lot easier when you can talk it out with a friend. Today we have a special episode talking about the similarities and differences of yoga as taught by a recreational therapist or a regular yoga instructor to special populations, and then yoga therapy as facilitated by someone who has been trained as a yoga therapist.
So I got my yoga teacher training in 2020 when the pandemic was raving. And but before, when I was like researching about it, I called this school and was talking to them and explained to them, I'm a recreation therapist. I would like to use yoga as part of the therapy we do. And they were like, whoa, hang on just a second. Like, this is a yoga teacher training school, but not a yoga therapy school. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that there was a specific difference. But like a lot of modalities, like art therapy, music therapy, there are specific qualifications that you need to become a yoga therapist. So it was super helpful talking to them to figure out, okay, this is what we are going to teach you. This is what we're not going to teach you. And so I thought it would be super helpful to explain that to recreation therapists out there, not just for if you're a recreation therapist wanting to get your yoga teacher training, but also if you're looking at hiring someone, what kind of like certifications to look for and how do you know what they'll actually know? So that is kind of where this started for us.
Yeah, and so today we have an actual yoga therapist in training who we're going to be interviewing today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our friend Alli Houseworth. Alli Houseworth is an RYT 500 yoga instructor, certified Warriors at Ease yoga instructor, IREST Level 2 instructor, and yoga therapist in training, with a passion for teaching trauma-sensitive yoga and mindfulness practices to veterans, first responders, and those recovering from substance use disorder. For 4 years, she's taught IREST and adaptive yoga to soldiers in the Recovery Care Unit, or the SRU, an extensive reconditioning program for soldiers suffering from visible and invisible injuries at Schofield Army Barracks and Fort Belvoir. Alli also served as a yoga therapist at Avenues Recovery Center, where she brought IREST and yoga to people recovering from substance use disorder. In June of 2022, Alli became the executive director of Warriors at Ease, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring every member of the military community has access to the healing power of yoga and meditation to help prevent and recover from physical and invisible injuries sustained as a result of time in service. So, hello, Alli. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited. I am so excited to talk to Alli because, like Carol said, we met her when she was you started doing yoga with the Soldier Recovery Unit first, right? Or was it IREST? Meditation.
I think we started with IREST and we added in yoga right before the pandemic.
Okay, so we started with IREST, which we'll probably touch on here, which is a form of yoga nidra, and then we added yoga in. But I have learned so much about yoga and yoga therapy type stuff from Alli, and I'm super excited to hear about her journey getting into this and how like this all started for you and all of your wisdom that you're gaining in your yoga therapy program. So Alli, do you want to just describe your yoga journey for all of us, kind of where it began and where you are now?
Sure. My very first experience with yoga was actually in college. At the time, I was an acting major, which is a thing, believe it or not. And in my acting classes, we had to do yoga. And I was like, nice. I don't know what this is. What are we doing? And it was a bunch of sun salutations and, it was nice. And then I had a friend invite me to a class on chakras. And I was like, that's cool. This is fun. I was not a very athletic person, but I felt like I could do some of this basic stuff. And then it fell off my radar for a long time. It came back into my life. I mean, that was, like 2000. That was a long time ago. And it came back into my life at some point, probably in the mid 2000s via like a DVD. And then it really made a comeback in my life in 2006, 15 and 16. So I married my husband in 2014 and he is active duty Coast Guard. In 2016, so 2 years later, and I believe at that point it had been 3 PCS moves at that point, I was feeling pretty unsatisfied in my career. I was working as an arts marketing consultant and had worked in the arts and theater field for over a decade. And we were living in Maryland, unsure if we would be in Maryland for 11 months or 4 years based on whether or not he would promote. And military people listening, I know you know how that goes. And I was like leaning into what sort of felt like a time in my life where I had previously been pretty depressed and was dealing with a lot of anxiety, and I could feel those symptoms coming back. And I was like, I need to get ahead of this before it gets really rough. Let me go back to this yoga thing. They say that that's really helpful. You know, the infamous they. So the very wise they. I found a studio locally and offered to, they have these programs where you can clean the studio for a discounted membership. So I had to fill out this application about why I wanted to clean the studio, and which I thought was odd.
That is so fun.
They really wanted dedicated people. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense. In retrospect, it makes sense. And I was like, I don't know, maybe when my husband retires, we'll open, some beach cafe in Puerto Rico that'll turn into a yoga studio. I have no idea. Like, I'm an entrepreneurial person. It'll be fine. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, if you're serious with that, we have a yoga teacher training starting in 3 weeks. I was like,
that's a big jump.
And I thought about it. My husband was in intense training to be a chief at the time, and he was never around. And I was like, you know what? Let's just go all in, go big or go home. Sure, sign me up. I love school. I love learning. So I enrolled and very quickly really fell in love with all things yoga. And I had taught in the past, so the teaching part was, relatively easy, but it was so fun. It was so fun. And the funny thing is that at the same time, I was working a seasonal job at the Navy Exchange at Walter Reed in Bethesda, Maryland, where soldiers would come in to buy like laundry soap and bracelets and whatever. And they were so happy to be there because they weren't in the hospital. They were just full of joy. So here I was doing this yoga teacher training, and then I'd go like sell bracelets and sunglasses to people and make them really happy. And I was like, well, what if I bring what if I bring yoga to this population? And that was sort of the beginning of the end. It was definitely the end, or the journey as it is.
Beginning of the beginning.
The beginning of the beginning. Yes, thank you, girl. It's much more optimistic there. It turns out we ended up staying in Maryland for 11 months. We ended up PCSing to Hawaii. When we got to Hawaii, I enrolled in a level 1 training with an organization called Warriors at Ease, which teaches yoga instructors how to teach trauma-informed and adaptive yoga to members of the military. It was in that training that I learned about iRest. So my 4 years in Hawaii was spent teaching Vinyasa Yoga as a certified yoga instructor at a studio on island while pursuing my Warriors at Ease certification and going through iRest to become a level 2 iRest instructor. And then in that journey, I met a whole bunch of yoga therapists, and I was like, what is that? What is that magical thing that all of you amazing people are doing? So that was sort of in the back of my mind as I was working with both of you at the SRU and taught at Hickam Air Force Base as well. And the pandemic hit, and Jenna, listening to your story, I guess the beginning of the pandemic was when everybody was like, what am I doing with my life? I should
yoga.
More things, since I am not doing, it's just everybody listening, it's gone through the same things, so you all know. But fortunately / unfortunately, my grandmother had passed away a few months before, and I never tell anyone this. She left me a little bit of money which happened to be just enough to cover the cost of a yoga therapy training. And
Oh,
she was really into education and always had this amazing healthy diet and like swam daily into her, early 90s or late
that's
80s.
amazing.
Yeah, and I felt like it was just a fun way to honor her memory and keep myself entertained and learning and growing while I was stuck in my house forever and ever.
That's
And
so
here I
cool.
am now back in Maryland, still in my yoga therapy program, continuing on the journey.
Oh, I love that. I love how you weren't really planning to be a yoga therapist back in 2000 when you were working at the NEX.
Yeah,
And
nope,
also kind of
zero.
like built off of that.
I didn't even know what a yoga therapist was, just like
Yeah.
Jana. I had no clue.
Yeah, it's so cool how that like how your story has evolved with each like progression in it. That's very, very similar to, I think, a lot of rec therapists that go into like, oh, I'm interested in recreation or I'm interested in helping people, and then it kind of comes together for
Yeah. You're like discovering these paths that you can take and then having doors open for you. So that's super cool. So today, what we want to talk about is the difference between regular yoga teacher training and yoga therapy. So in terms of what they teach you and like the logistics, can you just tell us like briefly what the difference is between that regular yoga teacher training and then your yoga therapy training?
Sure. Most yoga teachers are certified through an organization called Yoga Alliance. And to get this certification, you have to go through a 200-hour yoga teacher training program, which is what Jana was referencing and what I enrolled in when I was doing the cleaning of the studio and working at the NEX. And in that, you get some anatomy, you get some chakra information, you're taught how to teach, you learn a little bit about the history and philosophy of yoga, things of the sort. And a yoga therapy certification through the international is gained through the International Association of Yoga Therapists. Those programs are 800 hours long, and you can only enroll in a certified yoga therapy, or rather an accredited yoga therapy program, if you've already completed your 200-hour certification. So by the time you graduate with a yoga therapy certification, you've completed at least 1,000 hours of training. So whereas in my 200-hour yoga teacher training, I think we had 6 to 8-ish hours of anatomy. I have done 125 hours of anatomy and physiology in my yoga therapy training program. So it's much more extensive in all the areas that I already mentioned: anatomy, physiology, chakras, which is energy centers, history, philosophy, etc. But then you, at least in my program, learn a lot more, way in depth on meditation, way in depth on yoga for specific populations or ailments such as trauma, heart disease, cancer, yoga for midlife, seniors, prenatal, chair yoga, yoga for autoimmune disease. I could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very basically, it's 200 hours versus 800 hours of
Yeah.
training. Yes.
Huge, way more of a commitment than just the yoga teacher training, way more in depth.
Yes.
Yeah. And it sounds like, yeah, you get to kind of specialize a little bit. Whereas, yeah, I remember the same, like we spent maybe an afternoon talking about some of those things in my 200-hour training. Very cool that you get to, kind of deep dive into like, what does this population need, or what does this anatomy in these poses look like, and how support that. That's awesome. So helpful.
Yeah. So just to like break down the yoga therapy process, like starting out before you even give therapy to the people you're working with, how do you find clients' needs or decide on what to focus on like during a yoga therapy session?
Yeah, do you do like a formal thing, or is it like an observation? What? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that yoga therapists, sort of a big difference between yoga teachers tend to teach in a studio. usually to groups of people, although yoga teachers can also teach to individuals and do individual lessons. Yoga therapy is almost the opposite, where most of the time you work one-on-one with people, but you can also teach groups, and those group sessions tend to be focused on specific areas of concern. For example, yoga for a healthy back, or yoga for those surviving with cancer, things like that. So when working with an individual, I have an intake form. We all have intake forms. My intake form is very extensive. I find that most of my clients are very surprised at how extensive it is. And we do, because yoga is mind, body, spirit, we're looking at things beyond just physical symptoms. So yes, people will come to yoga therapy because they have back pain, let's say, and we're going to talk about and assess the symptoms in the same way that or in a similar way, I should say, that a PT would. So where is the location of the pain? When did it start? What's the pain scale? What aggravates the pain more? Do you feel it more in the morning and in the nighttime? All those sort of basic questions that you get there. But we're also doing an assessment of your entire life, essentially. So what's your current care? Are you seeing a physical therapist? Are you taking pharmaceuticals? Are you doing holistic care? I want to know who else is on your team supporting you. We do what's called doshic observation. So doshas come from Ayurveda, which is a sister science of yoga, and all yoga therapists are trained to a certain extent in Ayurvedic practices. So we're looking at things like your energy level, the construct of your body. Are you slimmer? Is your skin dry? Do you have full, thick hair? Like, what do your eyes look like? Things that, a PT would probably never look at. And then we're asking questions about lifestyle. How often, what's your sleep like? What is your diet like? Do you sweat often? How quick are you to anger? And all of these questions really tie into the science of Ayurveda and also yoga. And then we do like a history assessment. So, of course, I want to know if there's cancer in your family. For me personally, I ask a lot of questions about trauma. What's your trauma history? What's your stress level? What's your job? How much do you work, et cetera? And so it's long, and I send these to my clients before we meet face to face. And then we review this intake form in that first meeting just to get obviously more information about what has been shared, but also for me to begin the observation process, right? How do they speak? Do they make eye contact? Do we seem tired? How do you sit? And all those sort of observational sides.
So cool. I had no idea how in depth it went, but it totally makes sense because I did read about how, yoga therapy is mind, body, and spirit. So
absolutely.
It definitely makes sense that you need to assess all of these things that, like you said, you might miss if you have a different expertise kind of thing.
Yeah. And a lot of people come in with that, Jana, and I hear I thought we were just going to do yoga.
Yeah.
No.
Also therapy.
Yes.
That is so cool. So when you're meeting with them in this session, do they come in with goals, or do you set goals with them based on this intake form?
I actually do ask in the intake form, what are your goals? So that is one of the final questions. Thanks for saying that, Jana. Yeah, goals are tough. People have a difficult time articulating goals. There's the goals that the client set, and then there's the goals that the therapist sees might be helpful too.
Yeah.
And we always want to work on client goals first and foremost and see if we can toss in, maybe 5 or 10% of a little extra something. That goal part is a big distinction between what a yoga class is and what a yoga therapist does, is that we have to set goals together as a team, and we have to track the efficacy of the practices towards meeting the client goals.
That is so cool. Yeah. I know in my yoga teacher training, we would often talk about if you want to have a specific thing in mind as the yoga teacher, you can tell the class, oh, we're going to set an intention, we're going to set a thing, and you kind of invite them to, today I'm focusing on mindfulness or breath, you can focus on that with me kind of thing. But there was nowhere near the sort of in-depth figuring out what does each person actually want to focus on. It was really up to the teacher to decide what they felt like they wanted to deliver. So that's a really difference, I think, between again what you said, yoga therapy and yoga just a regular yoga class.
Moving on to planning out a yoga therapy session, what are the things that you consider when you're planning a session that you wouldn't consider when you're planning like your regular yoga teacher, not therapy class?
It's so funny that you say that, Carol, because I say to my clients in small groups, I always come in with a plan and then I throw the plan out the window.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, why do I even come in with a plan? But once I've seen the intake and I know what their goals are,
Mm-hmm.
then I can be like, okay, well, clearly this person is here for low back pain or whatever it may be. And so I'm going to pull out certain asanas, certain postures that are great for low back pain, or assessments that we can do to figure out where that might be coming from, range of motion and things of the sort. And I'll always, basically every session is going to be comprised of some conversation in the beginning. How are you? What's going on? Checking in. There's always going to be some kind of physical movement, some kind of breathing, and some kind of meditation. So I come in with a very loose outline. And then in the session, to me, the session is very collaborative. So, maybe today the energy level is super low and we do less movement and more breathing or more meditation. I don't know that until I'm face to face with the person. When I teach a yoga class, like if I'm teaching a vinyasa class at a studio, like a regular studio class, I come in with a sequence and I know what we're doing. And I can adapt in that moment to be like, okay, well, my students are more advanced. Let's level this up. Or this person needs modifications. I'm just going to toss out a modification, but I'm not collaborating. I'm not having a conversation with the students in the studio. I'm always having a conversation with the students in yoga therapy.
That's
It
interesting.
seems way more intentional with yoga therapy because you're like actually working towards a specific goal. Whereas your regular yoga class, it's like, we're going to do this yoga sequence today. And like, I want you to have a good experience, but it's not, we're going to work on your low back pain.
Yeah. And I want to know, like, does this feel good? Does this not feel good? Where are you feeling this? Like, I'm going to ask you questions the whole thing. Until the meditation part, and then you can.
So when you do yoga therapy, it's not like a flowing class where you're like, now do this, now do this. It's like you do it, you may talk about it, or you may like, is that kind of more what it would look like?
Yeah, I would say, look, like it depends is like the key phrase, right? So if the client needs a flowing class, which a lot of people need, then they'll get a flowing class. But I would say that it is way less likely that that would be the case. Way less likely that that would be the case. So you might be given, if you were a client and you were working with like a physical concern, physical rather than an emotional or mental concern, I might give you 6, or 4 asanas. So 4 postures to do in a sequence. Yes. And that's it. And, it might take you 20 minutes, 15 minutes to do that.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. So what if it's not like a physical goal? Like, can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what if their goal is like decrease depression or something? What would that look like as you're going through?
Thank you for asking that question, because
that's kind of hard, but
no, that's actually my passion. So it's funny I just checked myself that I was starting with the physical, because a lot of people, when they think of yoga, think of the physical. But in the tradition of yoga, these physical postures, these asanas, were done so that you could meditate. It's like just sort of this bonus stuff that we do to get the ickiness out of the body before we learn how to try to be still, at least. So yes, I work with most of the populations I work with are mental health or behavioral health concerns, right? So if someone comes in, first of all, with the awareness that they have depression, hooray, right? And then we can look at, what are the symptoms of depression? What are the severity, the level of them? Like, and then we look at a goal, like what's a goal? Like, is our sleep better, right? Because depression can affect sleep. Are we able to get out of bed today? Are we feeling slightly more motivated? And we can do these on scales, 1 to 10, high, medium, low, track all of that. A lot of it is just a general, like, I just feel better and I don't know how to articulate that necessarily.
Yeah.
Right? So if I'm working on my own, that's fine. If I'm working in a clinical setting, sometimes they want more detail on that. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Jana?
Yeah, that's super interesting. Like how to kind of, take that and say, okay, like how do we, it's I guess a lot more mindfulness maybe is what it would be, like a lot more like how are you feeling and how does this make you feel emotionally? Is that kind of what you're
Yeah, I think so. In the intake, that's where we have those questions like how much sleep are you getting? Do you wake up in the middle of the night? So we can look there and say like that could be depression, that can be anxiety, that could be trauma that's leading to that symptom. So let's latch on to that symptom and see if that one symptom increases or rather decreases, hopefully, or increases.
Yeah.
Depending on which one we're looking at. And I've had clients who have a lot of anxiety also, and I've heard things like I'm able to catch a thought, right? So I'm able to stop myself before I do something, right? Whether like emotional reactivity or going down a rabbit hole with your thoughts. And to me, that's a huge success.
Yeah, definitely.
That's really, really cool. So how do you how after the session do you guys talk about like how was that, or do they like send you like, I guess how would you evaluate our sleep? Is that like what happens like in the conversation before the class and after the class, or is there like a more formal thing where they like, I don't know, fill out a survey for you or something and tell you like, yes, this was good, or I guess how does that kind of work to know, did this work, like is this helping?
I would say yes and yes. At the end of the class, there's not going to be very much conversation because I tend to want to leave people in like a
meditation.
Yeah, like a feeling okay state. But throughout the class, throughout the session rather, I've checked in and seen what worked, what hasn't. Everyone will receive homework for the week or 2 weeks, depending on when we meet again. So little things to do at home. And then we'll check in at the beginning of the next session on how things have improved since they've been doing it on their own, or if they even have done it on their own, right? Not everybody does their homework. That's fine. And to be honest, I haven't done a lot of sort of surveys or numerical ratings or scales, but that has been on the list of things that I do want to do. I think that is extremely helpful for clients to see numerically how they've progressed over time. But, everyone's different. Not everybody likes the numbers and the charting. Some people just like the general vibe and how it feels.
Right. As if you have anxiety or something, you're like, why isn't it
right? Exactly. Or if you're overly analytical and you're stuck in your thinking mind, I kind of don't want you to overly think about your experience. I want you to learn how to feel into the experience. But if you're working in a medical setting, right, that's where we need to have a lot of those hardcore assessments and scales done, right? Or if you're research based, and we need quote
want the numbers to back up what you're doing.
Exactly. The Western science proof. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So when you get done working with your clients, do you take notes after yoga therapy sessions, or is there like any methods that you use when you take notes?
Yes. 100%. I even take notes after every group class I teach too, personally. It's just a way for me to help remember what happened and sort of lock it in. Ideas are fresh for what could be worked on next time and adjusted in the next session together. My training, we're taught about SOAP notes. So a subjective, objective assessment and plan before and after every session. And it was different when I worked at Avenues. When I worked at the recovery center, we had to write notes after every session. And in that setting, I was working in group settings. So I would do group notes, but, or rather notes for a group session, but it was individual notes for every client. And in that session, that's based on what the center, and we can talk later maybe about where else yoga therapists work, but in that sort of medical setting, they're looking for reports on any reports of physical pain or past medical history, any diagnoses, my own observations of physical pain or limitations, if someone was speaking quickly or if they were teary, circumstantial speech, and then that's all sort of in the medical side, but I'm also writing notes for their providers. So their counselors. So we'll do things, and this is tied into IRS, like a session on joy, right? And I'll write down what brings the folks joy so that it could be used by the counselors or other team members in a different or appropriate setting.
That's really cool that you get to work with a whole treatment team on this and be able to like collaborate with them. That's awesome that they see this value that you're providing and see that you could be a great resource for them to get this information. That's really cool.
Yes, it was an incredible experience.
So awesome. So you talked about like mostly mental health, right? That you've worked with mental health soldiers, we know. So do you have like, so I guess you were about to say like other settings that a yoga therapist could work that maybe you haven't worked in. Is there something, I guess, yeah, can you, so
yes,
yeah, mental health and physical health, but kind of what specific settings, I guess?
Sure. I think there's an opportunity for a yoga therapist to work in any mental or physical health capacity, period. It is a newer modality that people are just starting to understand. So I very, very much appreciate both of you having this conversation with me just to educate the public more about what's available. Many yoga therapists will work alone, so just taking private clients that they meet maybe from a studio class, friends and family, then growing your network, or have a network of providers. So we can team up with therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, physical therapists, cardiologists are a big one, so that they can refer their clients to us for care. We could be embedded into a clinical setting like I was at the recovery center, where I was a full-time salaried employee that was very much part, I don't want to say very much part of, I was part of the clinical team. So participating in rounds every morning, doing the same trainings that the clinical team was doing. And again, that was in a residential recovery center for substance use disorder. So in that field, a similar approach could be taken for intensive outpatient treatment programs. I know that there are intensive outpatient treatment programs for, I mean, everything, but I'm thinking specifically of PTSD. And in those settings, people are taught mindfulness practices, but you could level that up by bringing in a yoga therapist. They have yoga therapists in the oncology departments at the Mayo Clinic and at Sloan Kettering cancer treatment facilities. I know that they're trying to implement one at Georgetown here in the DC area. I have a friend who works for a neurologist in a pain management center. That's huge. That is a huge opportunity. And I believe that she is full-time, but that could also be a setting where that person doesn't come in full-time. They could come in part-time. There's yoga therapists at senior care centers. There's, trying to think about where else I know of. I mean, look, it could be anywhere.
Yeah.
I think it should be everywhere, but I'm a little bit.
Definitely. Yeah, it sounds like they can be in a lot of different settings working with like all sorts of populations. But
yes,
I feel like too, when you're doing the mind, body, spirit, like that just applies so easily to, like you said, everyone, like everyone has health in all of those realms that it sometimes needs to be supported and built up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Make yoga, like yoga therapy, part of like a human resource department or something.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Everybody needs this, but
occupational wellness is a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you normally, we really like to, you know, bring up research articles on this podcast so that therapists can know what's out there, but there's just too much to bring up for yoga therapy that I'm just going to give people a list of where they can look for them, because literally like anything I type in, there is a yoga therapy for it. It's kind of like you were saying, like cardiologists, neurologists, like any population. I was actually surprised at like how specific some of them are getting, like COPD for like yoga for COPD, like just some very like specific diagnoses that normally maybe we would group and say like, okay, yoga for, I don't know, lungs, or yoga for cardiology, but you can get really specific. So, and there's lots of really cool stuff out there. So yogaalliance.org, and we'll have all of these in the show notes. So no worries about taking notes. The IAYT that Alli, you were talking about, right? They have this International Journal of Yoga Therapy. And I was having a fun time trying to access it. You got to be a member to access it unless you're a student, right? And then you can access it through student. So I was kind of like going through a student account to try and access some of those, and it was so cool, the different ideas that they were bringing up about this new treatment and how it's benefiting all of these different populations. You can also just go to Google Scholar and type some things in. I know sometimes that doesn't work for some modalities, but there were plenty of things that I could pull up here. So recreation therapists that are trying to make their research, or make the yoga research based, or present to their companies or superiors why they want a yoga therapist, it shouldn't be too difficult to find the research behind why. It's all over the place. Is there anything you want to add to that, Alli? Anything that I missed?
I'll just expand on the AIYT website, the International Association of Yoga Therapists. It is an extensive website that isn't necessarily the easiest to maneuver. I know they're working on that actually actively. They do have a resources tab, and if you dig around in there, you'll be able to find PDFs that link to other articles. I've also found PubMed to be helpful, although very extensive PubMed. And I recently came across a lot of research that was done by a yoga therapist who is also a psychologist, which is not an unusual combination. So a lot of people that are psychologists and yoga therapists, have published a lot in journals. And I would just say, be Google savvy, right? So if you're like, oh, I work at, an addictions facility, you could type in like addiction psychologist, yoga therapist research and see what comes up. Because Jana is right. There is a ton out there. And it can be very, very specific for sure.
Mm-hmm. So we already talked at the beginning about like the difference between being a yoga teacher versus a yoga therapist. And you kind of touched on like, it's a lot more in depth to become a yoga therapist. You already have to be a 200-hour certified yoga teacher before you can even start your yoga therapist training. So if someone is a yoga teacher and they're interested in pursuing yoga therapy, how do you find a program for it? You said it has to be accredited. Like, where would somebody go to do that?
Okay. The IAYT website has the list of accredited programs because they are the governing body, somewhere in the navigation bar. That is actually pretty easy to find, that one. I actually think I Googled mine. I don't think I actually went straight through the IAYT website. I just did a quick Google search and saw what came up.
Oh, that's super cool.
Is there like any specific population-based training for yoga therapists? Like, do you specialize in one area, or is it kind of like general? What does that look like?
That's a good question, Carol. I really only looked in depth at two programs, really looking, took my needs based on location and cost. And in neither one of those programs, there was a specialty.
Okay.
I believe I was trying to find on the AIYT website exactly what the curriculum is to be required to be an accredited education program. I had a difficult time finding that, so forgive me. But I'm fairly certain that, everyone that's accredited is going to have to cover certain basic things like Ayurveda, anatomy, physiology, chakras, some special populations. But as far as specialties with population, no. But there are yoga therapy programs with specialty in different types of yoga. There could be. So like Iyengar or Vini yoga are yoga therapy, or rather yoga styles that
Mhm.
certain schools specialize in or not, or you can select a school that does not have a specialty to get a more broad range of experience.
Mhm.
That's really cool. I didn't even consider that because there's yoga teacher trainings that are specified in those. So I guess I should have like made the jump that it would
Yeah.
make sense that if you want to be specifically focused in a type of yoga
Mm-hmm.
deliver therapy through, that's very interesting. That's really cool. So in your program, you said it doesn't specialize, so do you cover a little bit of everything, or is it just kind of like whatever, like if you are a yin yoga teacher, you do yin yoga, if you're a vinyasa, you do vinyasa, or how does that work in your program?
So when I say types of yoga, I should say it's not like a yin yoga therapy program for 800 hours. And yin yoga is sort of a pretty common form of yoga, the one where you're still and don't move for 3 to 5 minutes. And it's deep stretching for those of you that are listening that might not be familiar with what yin is, for example. But yoga therapy pretty much comes from a gentleman named Desikachar and different sort of spin-offs from him, one of which, I feel like I'm giving you the long answer now, one of which is Vini Yoga. Okay, so a lot of my teachers are Vini Yoga trained. So they went to the yoga therapy program where they like all studied Vini Yoga. But my program is not that. I just happen to have teachers that come from that because I didn't want a one site focus. I wanted the sort of broader base where in my program they pull in teachers from all over the country who are sort of specialists, hardcore anatomy people, like 4 of them, and like hardcore neuroscientists to do the neuro stuff. Like that's what I wanted. I didn't want just one lineage. I wanted a little bit of everything.
That's really cool. So do you guys, I know with COVID, everyone was online, started with COVID, but do you guys have like in-person meetings that you do, or is it mostly online or some sort of hybrid? How does it?
Yeah, I chose my program, and just to say the name, I'm doing my training through Soul of Yoga. And the Soul of Yoga is based in Encinitas, California, down by San Diego. And I chose them mostly because, well, for lots of reasons, but one of which was the schedule. So all of the anatomy and physiology is online even before COVID. So they held it in person. They have excellent videographer. It's all cut and done together. 125 hours, all done online. And then we have these longer modules between 3 and 10 days where, let's say in like life before COVID, you would fly out to Encinitas and you'd take your 3 days on, yoga for autoimmune disease, or you take your 10 days and do, soul of wellness or whatever it may be. And then you'd leave. And then 6 to 8 weeks later, there would be another module. So you're sort of in and out of the area. But because of COVID and because of AIYT, the governing body, they let all these programs, all yoga trainings, no matter if it's yoga therapy or yoga teacher trainings, move to online. So, and that just keeps getting extended and extended and extended for all the reasons that we know. So now, long story short, Soul of Yoga is hybrid. So I have the option to go in person or to stay online.
Oh,
That's nice.
cool.
Kind of gives you more flexibility to be able to work and be trained.
100%. Yeah. Especially because I was living 3,000 miles away from it in one direction, and now I'm living 3,000 miles away from it in another direction.
Yeah.
Makes it a little easier. That's really cool. So
Yeah.
when I did the 200-hour yoga teacher training, it was like, you're going to be done in like 3 months kind of thing. When you start a yoga therapy training, are you expecting it to take a couple years, or is it, because like you said, there's a break for 6 to 8 weeks. So are you working on other things during that time, or what is the commitment expectation?
So that depends on the program. And that was a deciding, like you could go to India and do a yoga therapy training program in a year, right? Or however they want to break up the 800 hours, right? I know Kripalu was another one I was looking at, and they do like 4-week, month-long blocks. So you go out to Kripalu for a month or two and you do it, and then you go away, and then you come back for another month or two. there's a program here in Maryland that I was also looking at that's a master's degree, master's of science in yoga therapy. So it's 2 years
cool.
and it's sort of structured like a master's degree program.
Uh-huh.
I already have a master's degree, tried not to get another master's degree, although it's tempting. So there's that. So my program, the expectation is that it takes between 2 and 5 years, 2 to 5 years to complete.
Okay, so so connected to that, there's a master's degree for this program, but you obviously don't have to have a master's for it. So what does the certification or accreditation license, how does someone know that you're a yoga therapist once you get there?
Okay, so this is really important to understand. Anybody, unfortunately, can say that they're a yoga therapist, right? I'm just going to say that I'm a yoga therapist. Great. I would highly encourage people who are looking to hire a yoga therapist to hire a certified yoga therapist through the International Association of Yoga Therapists, which means that that individual has completed an 800-hour yoga therapy training program through an accredited training program. Mm-hmm. That designation is C-IAYT. And I'm going to put an asterisk at the end of that statement. 2 asterisks. Okay, asterisk number 1 is for me personally. So I am a yoga therapist in training. Okay, so I have about 40 hours of 800 left, right? So I do not have my CIAYT designation, but you can still work with me knowing that I have almost all of the knowledge and a good bit of experience, right? If that's what you want. There are also people who have been certified through AIYT who just haven't paid to have their certification renewed. So, you know, these are seasoned professionals who've been working for 20 years that are just like, you know, I'm good in my business. Wow. I don't work for the military. I don't work for a hospital that needs the accreditation thing. Yeah. You know, so just check that it isn't someone who's like, I did a yoga therapy training that was 100 hours and now I can call myself a yoga therapist. Yeah. Right? That's not what we want. We want this high level of specialty.
Yeah, definitely.
Work in a clinical setting, you're probably going to need the letters after your name.
So let's say like you're a recreational therapist, you're not a yoga therapist, but you'd like to use yoga as a modality. Are there any resources you can recommend or like things that someone could do to just make their yoga practice more therapeutic without being like full on yoga therapy?
Yeah. I mean, there are like, I will say, we've been talking about yoga therapists the whole time. There are, like, can I say badass? I'm going to say badass. Yeah. There are badass yoga teachers who have just their 200-hour designation. And or 500, 2 or 500 hours, right? And they've been teaching for 3 years. They've been teaching for 20 years. They're just gifted. Yeah. Or they have additional training. And, you know, if that's the type of person you're looking for, hire that type of person. Is totally, totally fine. I think it's just a matter of your preference. Like when I started working with Jana at the SRU, I didn't have a yoga therapist. I hadn't even started on my journey. But I had a specialty in working with trauma and the military population. So that worked really well, I think, for what Jana was looking for at the time.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We should talk about that. So that you got that specialty with Warriors at Ease. Can you talk a little bit about Warriors at Ease and how long that level 1 program was?
I would love to talk about Warriors at Ease. I love them. So, you know, like a yoga teacher will go through their 200-hour, right? And then, you know, some people become super passionate about prenatal yoga or yoga for seniors or yoga in prisons. The prison yoga project is a thing. Or for me, it was trauma and the military population. So, you know, there are multiple organizations that teach this. I think Warriors at Ease is the best. So I went into their training program. They had a level 1 training, a level 2 training, and then additional work that you had to do to get certification. I believe, gosh, were they 50 hours each? So it's a fair number of hours, but it's not 800.
Yeah.
Right. And you can do that with prenatal. You can do that with chair yoga. You can do that with yoga seniors, like all these specialty programs out there. If you are a yoga teacher, 200 hour, you can find these organizations out there that provide these specialty trainings. And to be honest, like Warriors at Ease's specialty training is outstanding. There are things that I'm learning in my yoga therapy program where I'm like, oh yeah, like no, yes, covered.
All about
there are trainings that I did at Avenues Recovery Center from like national level uniform services university trainings for trauma in the military given to psychiatrists and psychologists, where I was like, oh, I already learned this from Warriors at Ease. Like, I got this. So they're out there. Go find them if that's what you're into. If you don't want to do the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So yeah, so if you're kind of like need an in between, like, okay, maybe I'm, a recreation therapist that's a yoga teacher, and now I'm working like so much with seniors, and so I want to get like an extra certification. I don't have to commit myself to 800 hours in a couple years. I can just do this one thing, and while I won't be a yoga therapist, I'll have a little bit more like expertise, I guess, in that.
Absolutely. And I just also want to toss in yoga for cancer is another very popular specialty. Yeah. So in my yoga therapy program, for example, they're pulling all of these programs. So I'm learning yoga for cancer from someone who created the curriculum for the yoga for cancer specialty. Yeah. So basically doing a ton of specialties and a lot of anatomy.
That kind of answers the question we had earlier about like, can you specialize as a yoga therapist?
Yes.
Maybe in like a more broad sense, like if you are working with a specific population, there are trainings that exist to allow you to specialize in that population.
Absolutely. Cool. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I think when we eventually do put together the show notes, we'll like put some links to some of those programs, just so if people are looking for those resources, they can go find the Yoga for Cancer or Warriors at Ease, like all that stuff. I think we're coming to the end of our interview time with Alli. Is there anything else you want to add? I feel like we went really in depth about all of this, and I learned so much about yoga therapy that I didn't know.
No, I'm just so excited to have had this conversation. It's a new and evolving field that a lot of people don't know about. And I just, I love it so much, and I'm so passionate about it that I just want everyone to understand it a little bit better. And really understanding that you can use a yoga therapist as part of your care team. So whether that's you as an individual deciding like, look, on my team, I need my doctor, I need my herbologist or acupuncturist, and I want a yoga therapist. And these are the people that I'm going to use on my team to help me reach my goal. Or if you're a clinician and you are working, for example, with a trauma population, and you know that trauma is held in the body, you can call upon a yoga therapist to, refer your client to this yoga therapist just for added support, because I have seen many times the power of working through the body, mind, and spirit to enhance the counseling experience. Like they just go hand in hand. So we're out there and way eager to help.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And so Alli, I was super excited that you are going to start doing online stuff. I know that was a thing during COVID, but do you, if someone wants to contact you or get more information, or, use you as a yoga therapist for them once you have your hours or wherever you're at in your training, what is the best way? How can we find you?
Thanks for asking, Jana. I think the easiest way to find me is via my website, which is allihouseworth.com. And I know you'll probably put that in the show notes, but it's Alli with 2 L's, not 1. Houseworth, just like it sounds, like the building and its value, Houseworth. And then on my website, there's a place where you can sign up for my email list. So that's sort of my primary means of communication. is via email. And there's social media too, and those links are also on the website.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Alli. I learned so much, and I'm super excited to get the word out to everyone about what this is and how to use this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey everybody, it's Carol. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about Warriors at Ease. Their mission is to bring healing power of yoga and meditation to help prevent and recover from physical and invisible injuries sustained as a result of time and service. If you'd like to learn more about their organization or make a donation in support of this mission, you can visit their website, warriorsatease.org. Thank you. Have a great day.